Maya Johnson wiped down the same table for the third time, her worn cloth moving in slow circles across the scratched surface. The lunch rush at Riverside Diner had ended an hour ago, leaving behind empty coffee cups, crumpled napkins, and the familiar smell of grease that seemed to live in her uniform no matter how many times she washed it. She glanced at the clock above the kitchen door. 3 more hours until her shift ended. Then, she could pick up her daughter Zara from the aftercare program at school. The diner sat on the edge of downtown Atlanta, caught between the gleaming towers of the business district and the tired neighborhoods where Maya had grown up. Through the large windows, she could see expensive cars sliding past on their way to important meetings while city buses wheezed to stops, carrying people like her to jobs that paid just enough to keep going but never enough to get ahead. Maya's reflection caught her eye in the window glass. At 28, she looked older than her years. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held a weariness that came from working double shifts and counting every dollar. The black slacks and white shirt of her uniform were clean but showing their age, just like everything else in her life. The bell above the door chimed, and Maya turned to see a man entering alone. She could tell immediately that he didn't belong here. His suit probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months, and his leather shoes clicked against the worn linoleum with the confidence of someone who had never worried about money. He was tall, maybe in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, and the kind of tan that came from vacations, not working outside. "Good afternoon," Maya said, grabbing a menu and walking over to him. "Just one today?" The man nodded, his blue eyes scanning the diner with curiosity rather than judgment. "Yes, thank you." Maya led him to a booth near the window, the same one where she had been wiping tables just moments before. As he slid into the vinyl seat, she noticed he moved carefully, like someone who had learned not to take physical comfort for granted. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" she asked, pulling out her order pad. "Coffee, please." "Black." Maya nodded and headed to the coffee station, wondering what had brought someone like him to a place like this. The Riverside Diner wasn't exactly hidden, but it wasn't the kind of restaurant that appeared in guidebooks or food blogs. It served honest food to working people, truckers making long hauls, and families who needed a decent meal at a fair price. She returned with the coffee, setting it down carefully on the table. "Have you had a chance to look at the menu?" "Actually," the man said, looking up at her with a slight smile. "What do you recommend?" Maya was surprised by the question. Most customers knew what they wanted, especially the ones who looked like they could afford to eat anywhere. "The meatloaf is good," she said. "It's Tuesday, so it's fresh. And the apple pie was made this morning." "Meatloaf it is, then. And I'll definitely save room for that pie." As Maya wrote down the order, she found herself relaxing slightly. There was something about his manner that put her at ease. He wasn't looking at his phone or acting impatient like so many customers did. He seemed genuinely present, genuinely interested in the conversation. "I'll get that started for you," she said, turning toward the kitchen. "Miss," the man called softly. Maya turned back. "Yes. I'm sorry, but I couldn't help noticing that drawing over there." He gestured toward the wall behind the counter, where a small framed sketch hung among the diner's collection of local photographs and newspaper clippings. "It's quite remarkable." Maya followed his gaze to the drawing he was pointing at. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a pencil sketch of a young girl sitting on a porch swing, her hair in pigtails, a book open in her lap. The detail was extraordinary. Every fold in the girl's dress, every strand of hair, the peaceful expression on her face as she read. Maya had looked at that drawing thousands of times over the years, but seeing this stranger's interest in it made her see it with fresh eyes. "Oh, that," she said, her voice suddenly quiet. "It's been there as long as I can remember." The man studied the drawing more carefully, leaning forward in his seat. "The technique is incredible. The way the artist captured the light, the emotion, it's museum quality." Maya felt something twist in her chest. "You think so?" "Absolutely. Do you know anything about the artist?" Maya hesitated. She had never told the story to a customer before, had never really told it to anyone except Zara. But something about this man's genuine interest made the words want to come out. "My father drew it," she said finally. "A long time ago." The man's eyebrows rose. "Your father? Is he a professional artist?" No, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was a janitor. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken questions. Maya could see the man processing this information, trying to reconcile the extraordinary skill evident in the drawing with the humble profession she had just mentioned. He asked gently. He died when I was 16, Maya said. 12 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss. Maya nodded, grateful that he didn't push for more details. She didn't tell him about the long shifts at the factory, about how her father would come home exhausted but still make time to draw, about how he never got the chance to share his talent with the world beyond their small apartment. I should get your order in, she said, needing to move, to break the spell of memory that the conversation had cast. But, as she walked toward the kitchen, she could feel the man's eyes still on the drawing, studying it with an intensity that made her wonder what he was seeing there that she had missed all these years. In the kitchen, Maya handed the order to Jerome, the cook who had been working at the diner almost as long as the drawing had been hanging on the wall. He was a large man with gentle hands and a laugh that could fill the entire restaurant when something struck him as particularly funny. Everything all right, Maya? He asked, noticing her distracted expression. Yeah, just that customer out there was asking about my father's drawing. Jerome glanced through the service window toward the dining room. The fancy guy? What's he want to know? Just about the artist. He seems to really appreciate it. Jerome smiled. Your daddy would have liked that. He was always hoping someone would see what was special about his work. Maya nodded, remembering how her father used to say that art was meant to be shared, not hidden away in apartments where only family could see it. He had been working on a portfolio when he died, planning to apply to art schools even though he was in his 40s and had responsibilities that made such dreams seem impossible. She returned to the dining room with fresh coffee, refilling the man's cup as he continued to study the drawing. Your father, he said as she poured. Did he have any formal training? No, Maya said. Everything he learned, he taught himself. He used to check out art books from the library, study them like textbooks. Remarkable, the man murmured. The composition, the use of light and shadow, these are advanced techniques. To develop this level of skill without instruction, Maya felt a familiar pride mixed with sadness. Her father had been extraordinary in ways that the world never got to fully appreciate. He had worked nights cleaning office buildings so he could be home when she got out of school, sketching in the early morning hours before she woke up. He drew constantly, she found herself saying. On napkins, pieces of cardboard, anything he could find. He said art supplies were expensive, but inspiration was free. The man looked at her with new interest. Do you have any of his other work? Some, Maya said carefully. Not much. We had to sell most of it after he died, just to, pay bills. The admission embarrassed her, but the man's expression showed only understanding, not pity. I imagine it must have been difficult, losing him so young. It was. But he taught me to appreciate beauty, even in small things. Even in places like this. As if to prove her point, the afternoon sun chose that moment to stream through the window, casting golden light across their table and illuminating the drawing on the wall with an almost ethereal glow. The man followed her gaze and smiled. He was right, he said. Beauty is everywhere if you know how to look for it. Jerome rang the bell from the kitchen, signaling that the meatloaf was ready. Maya excused herself to get the plate, but when she returned, she noticed that the man had taken out his phone and was looking at something on the screen with great concentration. Here you go, she said, setting down the plate with its generous portion of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Jerome makes the best meatloaf in the city. Thank you, the man said, putting his phone away. Maya, isn't it? I heard the cook call you by name. Maya nodded, surprised that he had been paying such close attention. Maya, he repeated, as if testing how the name felt. That's a beautiful name. Thank you. My father chose it. He said it meant illusion in some languages, but mother in others. He liked the idea that names could have different meanings depending on how you looked at them. A philosopher as well as an artist, the man observed. You must miss him very much. Every day, Maya admitted. Especially when I look at that drawing. It reminds me of summer afternoons when I was little, reading on our front steps while he worked in the small garden behind our apartment building. The man took a bite of the meatloaf and nodded appreciatively. This is excellent. Your cook wasn't exaggerating. Maya smiled. Jerome's been here 15 years. He takes pride in his work. As do you, I imagine. It's not easy work, being on your feet all day, dealing with all kinds of people. Maya was surprised by his observation. Most people didn't think about what it took to do her job well, the physical stamina required, the emotional labor of staying pleasant even when customers were difficult or dismissive. I have a daughter, she said simply. That makes it easier. When you're working for someone else, the work has meaning. How old is she? 8. Her name is Zara. She's smart like her grandfather was. Always drawing. Always asking questions about everything. Does she know about her grandfather's talent? Oh yes. I tell her stories about him all the time. About how he could make magic with just a pencil and paper. She has some of his sketchbooks, the ones I managed to keep. The man ate slowly, savoring each bite while continuing to glance at the drawing on the wall. Maya found herself lingering near his table, drawn into their conversation in a way that was unusual for her. She typically kept interactions with customers brief and professional, but there was something about this man that made her want to share more. May I ask what you do for work? She found herself saying, then immediately regretted the personal question. I'm sorry, that's not really my business. No, it's fine, the man said. I'm in business. Investments, mostly. I spend a lot of time looking at things and trying to determine their value. Must be interesting work. It can be. But it's also taught me that value isn't always obvious at first glance. Sometimes the most precious things are the ones that others overlook. As he spoke, his eyes drifted again to the drawing, and Maya felt that there was something more he wasn't saying, some deeper meaning to his words that she couldn't quite grasp. The afternoon was growing later, and the diner was nearly empty except for one elderly regular who came in every Tuesday for coffee and pie. Maya could see through the kitchen window that Jerome was already starting to clean up for the evening shift change. Would you like that pie now? She asked. Please, the man said. And perhaps another coffee. Maya brought him a generous slice of apple pie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, the way Jerome insisted it should be served. The man took a bite and closed his eyes briefly, clearly enjoying the simple pleasure of the homemade dessert. Outstanding, he said. Your cook is an artist in his own right. I'll tell him you said that. He'll be pleased. As the man finished his pie, Maya began her end-of-shift cleaning routine, wiping down nearby tables and refilling salt and pepper shakers. She found herself moving slower than usual, reluctant for the conversation to end. It had been a long time since she had talked to anyone about her father, and this stranger's appreciation for his work had awakened something in her that she had thought was safely buried. Maya, the man said as she approached with his check. Would you mind if I asked you something? Sure, she said, setting the small piece of paper on the table. That drawing, do you know when your father made it? Maya thought for a moment. I think it was the summer before he died. He was working on several pieces around that time, trying to put together a portfolio. A portfolio for what? He had this dream of applying to art school. I know it sounds crazy, a man in his 40s with a child to support, but he never stopped believing that it wasn't too late to change his life. The man was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his coffee cup. When he looked up, his blue eyes seemed brighter somehow, more intense. It doesn't sound crazy at all, he said softly. Some of the greatest artists didn't find their calling until later in life. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes unexpectedly. He never got the chance to find out what might have been possible. No, the man agreed. But he left something beautiful behind. That drawing has brought joy to everyone who has seen it over the years. That's not nothing. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She watched as the man pulled out his wallet and placed two $20 bills on the table, more than double what his meal had cost. That's too much, she protested. No, he said, standing up from the booth. It's exactly right. He extended his hand to her, and when Maya shook it, she noticed that his grip was firm but gentle, the handshake of someone accustomed to making important decisions. Thank you for sharing your father's story with me, Maya. And thank you for keeping his memory alive. Maya watched as he walked toward the door, then turned back one last time to look at the drawing on the wall. For a moment, she thought he might say something else, but instead he simply nodded and walked out into the late afternoon sunshine. As the door closed behind him, Maya realized she hadn't even asked his name. She looked down at the $20 bills on the table, then up at her father's drawing, wondering why the stranger's interest in it had affected her so deeply. There had been something in his eyes when he looked at it, a recognition that went beyond casual appreciation. Jerome emerged from the kitchen, untying his apron. How was the fancy customer? Maya arrived at Riverside Diner the next morning to find an unusual crowd gathered outside. 3 news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes extended toward the sky like electronic flowers reaching for sunlight. Reporters checked their makeup in compact mirrors while cameramen tested their equipment. Maya's stomach dropped as she recognized the organized chaos that meant something big was happening. She pushed through the small crowd of curious onlookers, her heart racing as she wondered what could have brought the media to their quiet neighborhood. The diner had never been newsworthy before. It was the kind of place that existed in the background of people's lives, important to those who needed it, but invisible to the wider world. Inside, Maya found Jerome already behind the grill, flipping pancakes with more force than necessary. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by obvious agitation as he muttered under his breath about reporters and their invasive questions. "Jerome, what's going on?" Maya asked, tying her apron around her waist. "Some fancy art people showed up an hour ago," he said without looking up from the grill. "Started asking questions about that drawing of your daddy's. Now there's reporters everywhere wanting to know about the hidden masterpiece they found." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. "Art people? What kind of art people?" Before Jerome could answer, the door chimed and 3 people entered wearing expensive suits and serious expressions. The woman in the lead had silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and carried a leather portfolio. Behind her, 2 men in their 30s followed with briefcases and tablets, looking like they had stepped out of a business magazine. "Excuse me," the woman said, approaching Maya with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. "Are you Maya Johnson?" "Yes," Maya said cautiously. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled, but it was the practiced smile of a professional negotiator. "My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm the director of Sterling Galleries in Manhattan. These are my associates, David Chun and Marcus Williams. We're here about your father's artwork." Maya glanced toward the wall where her father's drawing hung, now surrounded by portable lights that the gallery team had apparently brought with them. The simple frame looked inadequate under such intense scrutiny, like a wildflower being examined under a microscope. "I don't understand," Maya said. "What about my father's artwork?" Victoria Sterling exchanged glances with her associates before speaking. "Ms. Johnson, we have reason to believe that your father may have been an exceptionally talented artist whose work was never properly recognized during his lifetime." "I know he was talented," Maya said, her voice growing defensive. "He was my father." "Of course," Victoria said smoothly. "But what you may not know is that this particular piece," she gestured toward the drawing, "displays techniques and a style that are remarkably similar to the work of several major artists who command significant attention in the art world today." Maya felt confused and overwhelmed. "What are you trying to say?" David Chun, the younger of the 2 men, stepped forward with his tablet. "Ms. Johnson, yesterday afternoon we received a call from a client who had seen this drawing. He was quite insistent that we come to examine it personally. Based on our initial assessment, we believe this piece could be worth considerably more than you might imagine." "Worth more how?" Maya asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. "We'd like to make you an offer," Victoria said. $50,000. Cash. Today." Maya staggered backward as if she had been physically struck. $50,000 was more money than she had ever imagined having at one time. It was more than she made in 2 years at the diner. It was college tuition for Zara, a house with a yard, security she had never dreamed possible. "50,000? She whispered. "That's just our opening offer," Marcus Williams said, speaking for the first time. His voice was smooth and persuasive. "If authentication goes as we expect, the final value could be significantly higher." Maya looked at the drawing that had hung on the diner wall for 12 years, the same drawing she had looked at every day during her shifts, the drawing that connected her to her father in ways these strangers couldn't possibly understand. The little girl in the picture seemed to be looking directly at her, asking what she was going to do. "I need to think about this," Maya said finally. Victoria's smile became slightly strained. "Ms. Johnson, I understand this is unexpected, but opportunities like this don't come along often. The art market moves quickly, and trends change. What's valuable today might not be tomorrow. You're trying to pressure me, Maya realized, her protective instincts kicking in. You show up here with cameras, and reporters, and big numbers, hoping I'll be so overwhelmed that I'll just say yes. David Chun held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. That's not our intention at all. We're simply trying to help you understand the significance of what you have. What I have, Maya said, her voice growing stronger, is my father's memory. That drawing isn't just artwork to me. It's the last piece of him that I can touch. Jerome had been listening to the conversation while pretending to focus on his cooking. Now he turned toward the group, spatula still in hand. Maya, you don't have to decide anything right now. These people can wait. Victoria Sterling's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing annoyance underneath. Actually, we do have time constraints. We have authentication experts flying in from Europe this afternoon. If Ms. Johnson wants to take advantage of our offer, we need an answer within the hour. Maya felt trapped between the promise of financial security and the fear of losing something irreplaceable. She thought about Zara, about the scholarship money that could change her daughter's entire future. She thought about never having to worry about rent again, about being able to buy groceries without counting every dollar. But she also thought about her father, about how he had dreamed of having his art recognized and appreciated. Would selling to these gallery people honor that dream, or would it just mean that his work would disappear into some private collection where no one else would ever see it? The door chimed again, and Maya looked up to see the man from yesterday entering the diner. He looked different in the morning light, more serious, more purposeful. He was followed by a woman with kind eyes and gray hair who carried herself with quiet authority. Victoria Sterling's demeanor changed instantly when she saw the new arrivals. Mr. Hartwell, she said, her voice tight with forced politeness. I didn't expect to see you here. The man Maya had served meatloaf to yesterday nodded coolly at the gallery director. Victoria, I see you received my call. Your call? Maya asked, looking between them in confusion. Victoria's professional smile returned, but Maya could see the tension in her shoulders. Mr. Hartwell is one of our most valued clients. He occasionally brings interesting pieces to our attention. Actually, the man said, walking over to Maya, my name is Robert Hartwell, and I need to tell you something important about your father's drawing. Maya stared at him, remembering their conversation from the day before, wondering how much of it had been genuine and how much had been some kind of elaborate setup. You knew, she said. Yesterday, when you were asking all those questions, you already knew something. Robert nodded. I suspected, but I needed to be sure, and I needed to understand the full situation before I said anything. The woman who had entered with him stepped forward. Ms. Johnson, my name is Dr. Eleanor Whitman. I'm an art historian and authentication expert. Yesterday, Mr. Hartwell sent me a photograph of your father's drawing, and I've spent the night researching what we might be dealing with here. Maya felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. What are we dealing with? Dr. Whitman opened the folder she was carrying and pulled out several photographs. Your father's style and technique are remarkably similar to a series of anonymous drawings that appeared at various galleries and art shows throughout the Southeast during the 1990s and early 2000s. The artist was never identified, but the work was highly regarded by collectors and critics. Anonymous drawings? Maya repeated. Someone was submitting exceptional artwork to galleries and exhibitions under various pseudonyms, never revealing their true identity. The pieces would appear, generate significant interest, and then disappear when people tried to contact the artist. Maya's mind raced as she tried to process this information. You think my father was this anonymous artist? We believe it's possible, Dr. Whitman said gently. The technical skill, the particular way he handled light and shadow, even the subject matter, it all matches what we know about the mystery artist. Jerome had abandoned all pretense of cooking and was listening intently to the conversation. Marcus always said he was going to be discovered someday, he said quietly. He used to talk about it like it was just a matter of time. Maya looked at Jerome in surprise. She had never known that her father had shared his artistic ambitions with the diner's cook. He would bring sketches sometimes, Jerome continued. Show me what he was working on. Always said he was going to send them to galleries when he had enough for a proper portfolio. Did he ever mention submitting work anonymously? Dr. Whitman asked. Jerome thought for a moment. He talked about wanting his art to be judged on its merit, not on who he was or where he came from. Said he didn't want people making assumptions about him before they saw what he could do. Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes as she imagined her father, proud and hopeful, submitting his artwork under false names because he understood that a black janitor from Atlanta would face prejudices that might prevent his work from being fairly evaluated. How much? Victoria Sterling interrupted, her patience clearly wearing thin. How much are we talking about if these pieces are authenticated as being by the same artist? Dr. Whitman and Robert Hartwell exchanged glances. If we can prove that Marcus Johnson was indeed the anonymous artist behind those works, Dr. Whitman said slowly, and if we can locate the other pieces in the series, we could be looking at a collection worth several $1 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Several $1 million. The phrase didn't seem real, didn't seem possible when applied to her father's quiet sketches and his dreams of art school. Several million, she whispered. The anonymous artist's work has been appreciating steadily for 20 years, Robert Hartwell explained. Collectors and museums have been trying to acquire pieces. If your father was that artist, his work would suddenly have a complete provenance and context that would make it even more valuable. Victoria Sterling's expression had shifted from confident negotiation to barely concealed panic. Of course, authentication is a complex process, she said quickly. There's no guarantee that these pieces are actually connected. Our original offer of $50,000 is still very generous for a single unattributed work. Maya looked at the gallery director with new understanding. You knew, she said. When you showed up here this morning, you knew this drawing might be worth millions, and you were hoping to buy it from me for $50,000. Now, Ms. Johnson, Victoria began, but Maya cut her off. You were hoping I'd be so overwhelmed by $50,000 that I wouldn't ask questions. You were counting on me not knowing what I actually had. Robert Hartwell stepped closer to Maya. This is exactly why I couldn't say anything yesterday. I needed to make sure you understood the full situation before anyone tried to take advantage of you. Maya turned to face him directly. But why do you care? What's in this for you? Robert was quiet for a moment before answering. 25 years ago, I bought one of the anonymous artist's pieces. It was the first artwork I ever purchased, back when I was just starting out in business and didn't have much money. I bought it because it moved me, because it reminded me of my own childhood in a small town where dreams seemed impossible. He gestured toward the drawing on the wall. That piece has hung in my office ever since. It's watched over every important decision I've made, every success I've achieved. When I saw this drawing yesterday, I recognized the style immediately, but more than that, I recognized the heart behind it. Maya felt her defenses softening as she listened to his explanation. You could have bought it from me yesterday for almost nothing. Why didn't you? Because it wouldn't have been right, Robert said simply. Your father's work deserves to be recognized properly, and you deserve to benefit from his talent. Not just financially, but in terms of understanding who he really was and what he accomplished. Dr. Whitman stepped forward again. Ms. Johnson, if you're willing, I'd like to propose a different approach than what Ms. Sterling is offering. Instead of selling this piece immediately, what if we work together to research your father's complete body of work? If we can authenticate him as the anonymous artist, we could organize a proper retrospective exhibition. Your father would finally get the recognition he deserved, and you would retain control over his legacy. Maya looked around the diner, at Jerome, who was nodding encouragingly, at the reporters still waiting outside, at Victoria Sterling, who was clearly hoping the authentication would fall through, at Robert Hartwell, who had risked his own interests to make sure she was treated fairly. What would that involve? Maya asked. We would need to examine this piece in detail, Dr. Whitman explained. We'd also need to see any other work you have by your father. And we'd want to research his life, understand where and when he might have submitted work to galleries. Maya thought about the cardboard box under her bed at home, filled with her father's sketchbooks and loose drawings that she had saved from their financial crisis after his death. She had looked through them countless times over the years, but always as memories, never as potential evidence of a secret artistic career. I have more of his work, she said quietly. Sketchbooks, drawings, paintings. I kept what I could. Dr. Whitman's eyes brightened. That's wonderful. That kind of documentation could be invaluable for establishing provenance and understanding his artistic development. And, in the meantime, Robert added, you don't have to make any decisions about selling anything. This is about understanding and honoring your father's work, not about pressure or quick profits. Maya looked one more time at Victoria Sterling, whose forced smile couldn't hide her frustration at losing what she had thought would be an easy acquisition. I think I'd like to work with Dr. Whitman, Maya said. I'd like to find out the truth about what my father accomplished. Victoria's professional mask finally slipped completely. Ms. Johnson, you're making a mistake. The art world is unpredictable, and authentication is never guaranteed. Our cash offer is real and immediate. So is my father's legacy, Maya replied. And I'm not in a hurry to sell it to someone who was trying to cheat me. As the gallery team gathered their equipment and prepared to leave, Maya felt a mixture of excitement and terror about what she had just committed to. The possibility that her father had been living a secret life as a respected artist was thrilling, but it also meant that everything she thought she knew about their struggles might need to be reconsidered. Robert Hartwell approached her as the reporters outside began to disperse, apparently having gotten enough footage of the mysterious art discovery for their evening news segments. Maya, he said, I want you to know that whatever we discover about your father's work, you're in control of what happens next. This is your decision, your father's legacy, and your family's future. Maya nodded, feeling overwhelmed but grateful. Thank why Maya's hands trembled as she unlocked the front door of her small apartment that evening, her mind still reeling from the events at the diner. The cardboard box under her bed had waited 12 years to reveal its secrets, and now the moment had arrived to open it with new eyes. Dr. Whitman had agreed to meet her at home the following morning to examine her father's remaining artwork, giving Maya one last night alone with his memory before everything changed. Zara looked up from her homework at the kitchen table, her 8-year-old face bright with curiosity. Mama, why were there news trucks at the diner today? Keisha's mom saw them on TV. Maya set down her purse and tried to organize her thoughts. How do you explain to a child that her grandfather, who died before she was born, might have been secretly famous? How do you prepare her for the possibility that their entire world could shift overnight? Some people think Grandpa Marcus was a very special artist, Maya said, sitting down next to her daughter. They want to study his drawings to learn more about them. Zara's eyes widened. Like the one at the diner? The one that looks like you when you were little? Maya smiled despite her emotional exhaustion. Zara had always insisted that the girl in the drawing looked like her mother, though Maya had never seen the resemblance herself. Yes, like that one. But we have more of his artwork here at home, and tomorrow a nice lady is going to look at them. Can I help? Zara asked eagerly. I know about art. Mrs. Patterson says I'm good at drawing too. Maya felt her heart squeeze with love and worry. If her father really had been the anonymous artist, if his work was worth millions as they suggested, what would that mean for Zara's simple, stable childhood? Money brought opportunities, but it also brought complications that Maya couldn't even begin to imagine. Of course you can help, Maya said. Grandpa Marcus would have loved to know that his granddaughter was interested in his art. After Zara finished her homework and went to bed, Maya finally allowed herself to retrieve the box from under her bed. She had moved it carefully from apartment to apartment over the years, through 3 different neighborhoods and 2 job changes, always making sure it was the first thing packed and the last thing settled. Inside were the pieces of her father that she had refused to sell even when the electricity was about to be shut off. Maya spread a clean sheet on her bed and began removing items from the box. First came the sketchbooks, 3 spiral-bound notebooks filled with her father's careful observations of the world around him. She had looked through these books countless times, but tonight she studied them with the systematic attention that Dr. Whitman had suggested. The earliest sketches showed her father experimenting with basic techniques, copying images from library books, and practicing shading exercises. But, as the pages progressed, Maya could see his confidence growing, his personal style emerging. By the time she reached the second notebook, the drawings had become more ambitious, portraits of people he had observed during his cleaning shifts, landscapes from memory, studies of light and shadow that demonstrated the advanced techniques Dr. Whitman had mentioned. In the third notebook, Maya found something she had somehow overlooked before. Tucked between the last pages was a small piece of paper with names and addresses written in her father's careful handwriting. Gallery submissions was written at the top, followed by a list of art galleries throughout Georgia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. Maya's breath caught as she realized what she was looking at. This was evidence that her father really had been submitting his work for consideration. The dates next to each entry showed submissions spanning nearly 5 years, from 1998 to 2003, the year before his death. At the bottom of the list, in different ink, her father had written M.A. accepted, with a small star drawn beside it. Maya stared at those words, trying to imagine the moment her father had received word that one of his pieces had been accepted for display somewhere. The joy he must have felt, the validation of years of secret effort. Below the sketchbooks, Maya found the loose drawings that she remembered from her childhood. These were larger pieces, more finished works that her father had created on proper drawing paper when he could afford it. Looking at them now, Maya could see why the gallery people had been so interested. The technical skill was undeniable, but, more than that, there was something in the way her father captured human emotion that felt immediate and honest. One drawing in particular caught her attention. It was a sketch of an elderly woman sitting on a bus, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her eyes looking out the window with an expression of quiet dignity. Maya realized this must have been someone her father had observed during his commute to work, just another face in the crowd that he had transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. At the bottom of the box, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, Maya found 2 small oil paintings that she had forgotten were there. Her father had rarely worked in color because paint was expensive, but these 2 pieces showed what he could accomplish when he had the materials. One was a sunset over the Atlanta skyline, painted from the roof of the building where he worked. The other was a portrait of Maya herself as a teenager, painted the year before his death. Maya held the portrait up to catch the lamplight, seeing her 16-year-old face rendered with loving attention to detail. Her father had captured something in her expression that she had never noticed. A determination mixed with vulnerability, the look of a young woman preparing to face the world alone. Had he somehow known that she would need to remember her own strength? As Maya studied the painting, she noticed something written faintly in pencil along the bottom edge. She brought it closer to the light and made out the words, "For Maya. May you always see the beauty I see in you. Love, Dad." Tears blurred Maya's vision as she realized this painting had been intended as a gift, probably for her graduation or 18th birthday. Her father had died 2 months before her graduation, and, in the chaos of funeral arrangements and financial crisis, she had packed away his artwork without examining it carefully. The phone rang, startling Maya out of her emotional reverie. She glanced at the clock, surprised to see that it was nearly midnight. Who would be calling so late? "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Ms. Johnson? This is Robert Hartwell. I apologize for calling so late, but I wanted to give you a heads up about something." Maya tensed. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Robert said quickly. "But I've been getting calls all evening from collectors and art dealers who heard about the discovery at the diner. Word travels fast in the art world, and people are very interested in your father's work." "What kind of people?" Maya asked, remembering Victoria Sterling's aggressive tactics. "All kinds. Some legitimate collectors, and museums, some dealers looking to make a quick profit. I wanted to warn you that you might start getting calls or visits from people claiming to represent your interests." Maya sank into her kitchen chair, suddenly, feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of what she had stepped into. "I don't know how to deal with art collectors. I barely know anything about the art world." "That's exactly why you need to be careful," Robert said. "There are people who will try to take advantage of your inexperience. Don't agree to anything without talking to Dr. Whitman or having a lawyer present." "A lawyer?" Maya's voice rose slightly. "I can't afford a lawyer." "Actually," Robert said carefully, "I've taken the liberty of contacting someone who specializes in art authentication and artist estates. She's agreed to provide initial consultation at no charge as a service to the art community. Her name is Sarah Mitchell, and she has experience dealing with posthumous discoveries." Maya wasn't sure whether to be grateful or suspicious of Robert's continued involvement in her affairs. Why are you doing all this? What do you get out of helping me? Robert was quiet for a moment before answering. Honestly, 25 years ago, when I bought that first piece by the anonymous artist, I was just starting out in business. I didn't have much money, but that drawing meant something to me. It reminded me that beauty and meaning could be found in unexpected places. That still doesn't explain why you're helping me now. That drawing helped me remember who I was and where I came from as I became more successful, Robert continued. It kept me grounded. When I saw your father's work yesterday, when I heard you talk about him, I realized I had a chance to give something back, to make sure his story was told properly, and that his family was protected. Maya found herself trusting his sincerity despite her natural caution. What happens next? Tomorrow, Dr. Whitman will examine your father's work and begin the authentication process. Sarah Mitchell will explain your legal options for protecting his legacy, and you'll start to understand the full scope of what your father accomplished. After hanging up, Maya returned to the bedroom where her father's artwork was spread across the bed like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. She picked up one of the sketchbooks and flipped through it again, this time looking for clues about her father's secret artistic life. On one page, she found a quick sketch of a gallery interior with people standing around looking at artwork on the walls. In the corner, almost hidden by careful shading, her father had drawn himself, a small figure watching from the doorway, holding a portfolio case. The image was heartbreaking in its honesty. This was how her father had seen himself, an outsider looking in, hoping for recognition but uncertain of his welcome. Maya thought about all the times her father had come home from work and immediately retreated to the small desk in their bedroom to draw. She had assumed he was just relaxing, pursuing a hobby to unwind from his demanding job. She had never imagined that he was actually preparing submissions for galleries, building a portfolio, pursuing his dreams with the same dedication that he brought to everything else. The more she examined his work, the more questions arose. How had he afforded art supplies for the larger pieces? How had he learned about gallery submission processes? How had he managed to maintain his secret artistic career while working full-time and raising a daughter alone after her mother left when Maya was 10? Maya picked up the painting of the Atlanta skyline and studied it. Dr. Eleanor Whitman arrived at Maya's apartment at 9 o'clock sharp, accompanied by Robert Hartwell and a woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Sarah Mitchell, the art attorney Robert had mentioned. Maya had spent the early morning hours carefully laying out her father's work on every available surface in her small living room, transforming the modest space into an impromptu gallery. Zara sat cross-legged on the floor, having insisted on being part of the examination process. She watched with fascination as Dr. Whitman put on white cotton gloves and carefully lifted the first sketchbook. "These are remarkable," Dr. Whitman said softly as she began turning pages. "The progression of skill is clearly documented, but, more importantly, I can see the development of a distinctive artistic voice." Maya stood nervously near the window, unsure whether she should sit or hover or offer coffee. This felt like a medical examination where the patient was already dead, and the results would determine everything about how he would be remembered. Sarah Mitchell, meanwhile, was photographing everything with a high-quality camera, documenting each piece for legal and authentication purposes. "Ms. Johnson," she said as she worked, "Robert explained your situation, and I want you to know that my firm specializes in protecting artists' estates. We've seen cases like this before, where important work is discovered after an artist's death." "Cases like this?" Maya asked. "Artists who worked outside the traditional art world establishment," Sarah explained. "Sometimes because of discrimination, sometimes because of economics, sometimes just because of geography. The art world has historically been very exclusive, but talent doesn't respect those boundaries." Dr. Whitman looked up from the sketchbook she was examining. "Maya, can you tell me about your father's education? Did he take any art classes, workshops, anything formal?" Maya shook her head. "He was completely self-taught. He checked out books from the library constantly, but he never had money for classes." "That makes this even more extraordinary," Dr. Whitman said. "The level of technical sophistication in these later pieces suggests years of dedicated study and practice. Your father must have been incredibly disciplined." "He was," Maya said, memories flooding back. He would get up at 5 in the morning to draw before work. I used to hear him moving around the apartment, trying to be quiet so he wouldn't wake me. Zara looked up from the floor where she had been sorting colored pencils. Mama, was Grandpa Marcus famous? Maya started to give her usual answer about how Grandpa was special to their family, but Dr. Whitman interrupted gently. Zara, we think your grandfather might have been more famous than anyone realized. He might have been an artist that people have been trying to learn about for many years. Zara's eyes grew wide. Like a mystery? Exactly like a mystery, Dr. Whitman said with a smile. And your mama is helping us solve it. As the morning progressed, Dr. Whitman's excitement became increasingly evident. She examined each piece with a magnifying glass, comparing techniques and styles with photographs she had brought of the anonymous artist's authenticated works. The brushwork in this oil painting, she said, holding up the sunset skyline, is identical to a piece that sold at auction 3 years ago for $400,000. The way he handles the transition between light and shadow, the particular method he uses for creating depth, these are like fingerprints. Sarah Mitchell stopped photographing to look at Maya directly. Do you understand what this means in practical terms? Maya shook her head, though she was beginning to sense the magnitude of what they were discovering. If we can definitively prove that your father was the anonymous artist, his complete body of work, including these pieces you've preserved, could be worth between $8 and $12 million. Maya sat down heavily in her kitchen chair, the numbers too large to process. 12 million. That's a conservative estimate, Dr. Whitman added. The market for his work has been artificially suppressed because no one knew who he was or whether more pieces would surface. Once we establish provenance and identity, values typically increase significantly. Robert Hartwell, who had been quietly observing the authentication process, spoke up. Maya, I want you to understand that this isn't just about money. Your father's work tells an important story about talent, determination, and the barriers that existed in the art world. His story needs to be told properly. What do you mean? Maya asked. We believe your father submitted work to galleries under various pseudonyms because he understood that his real name and background would create prejudices, Dr. Whitman explained. He was fighting a system that wasn't ready to recognize a black janitor as a serious artist. Maya thought about the gallery list she had found in her father's notebook, about the notation that one piece had been accepted. He got into at least one show. I found a note that said M.A. accepted. Dr. Whitman's eyes lit up. M.A. could stand for Marcus Anonymous, or it could be initials he used as a pseudonym. If we can track down that exhibition, it would provide crucial documentation for authentication. Sarah Mitchell pulled out a tablet and began making notes. I can have my researchers look into exhibition records from that time period. If your father's work was displayed publicly, there should be documentation. What happens now? Maya asked, feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of the process. Several things need to happen simultaneously, Sarah explained. First, we complete the authentication process with multiple experts to establish definitive proof. Second, we research your father's exhibition history to build a complete catalog of his work. Third, we make decisions about how to handle the increased value and public interest. Public interest? Robert pulled out his phone and showed Maya a news article that had been posted online that morning. The headline read, Anonymous Artist Mystery May Be Solved. Hidden Masterpiece Found in Atlanta Diner. The story is already spreading, he said. By tomorrow, there will probably be national coverage. You need to be prepared for a lot of attention. Maya felt panic rising in her chest. I don't want attention. I just want to understand what my father did and make sure it's respected. That's exactly the right attitude, Sarah said reassuringly. And that's why you need legal representation. There will be people who try to take advantage of this situation, people who will make offers or claims about your father's work. I can help you navigate that. Dr. Whitman carefully closed the last sketchbook and removed her gloves. Based on my preliminary examination, I'm confident that your father was indeed the anonymous artist. I'll need to bring in 2 other experts to confirm my assessment, but the evidence is overwhelming. She turned to address Maya directly. Your father was an extraordinary artist who deserved recognition during his lifetime. We can't give him that, but we can make sure his legacy is properly honored. Maya looked around her small apartment, at her father's artwork displayed on every surface, at her daughter, who was absorbing every word of this life-changing conversation. "What would he have wanted?" she asked quietly. "Based on what I see in his work," Dr. Whitman said thoughtfully, "I think he would have wanted his art to be shared, to bring beauty and meaning to other people's lives." He was clearly driven by more than personal recognition. There's a generosity of spirit in these pieces that suggests he created art because he believed it mattered. Zara looked up from her sorting. "Mama, if we have a lot of money, can I still go to my same school?" Maya felt her heart ache at the innocence of the question. "Of course, baby. Nothing has to change unless we want it to." But, even as she said it, Maya knew that everything was already changing. The phone had been ringing all morning with calls from reporters and art dealers. There was a news van parked outside her building. And somewhere in New York or Los Angeles or London, people were probably already planning exhibitions and making calculations about profit margins. Sarah Mitchell seemed to read her thoughts. "Maya, I want you to understand that you control this process. You own your father's work, you own his story, and you get to decide how it's shared with the world. No one can force you to sell anything or participate in anything you're not comfortable with. What would you recommend?" Maya asked. "Take time to understand your options," Sarah said. "We can organize a proper retrospective exhibition that honors your father's memory and artistic achievements. We can establish a foundation to support other undiscovered artists. We can create scholarships in his name. Or we can simply ensure that his work is preserved and valued appropriately." Dr. Whitman packed up her equipment carefully. "I'll have my full authentication report ready in 2 weeks. In the meantime, I strongly recommend that you not make any commitments to sell or exhibit any pieces." After the experts left, Maya and Zara sat among the artwork in the suddenly quiet apartment. The magnitude of what had just been confirmed felt surreal, like they were living someone else's life. "Mama," Zara said thoughtfully, "I wish I could have met Grandpa Marcus." Maya pulled her daughter close. "He would have loved you so much, baby. And you know what? You did meet him, in a way. Every time you look at his drawings, every time you pick up a pencil to create something beautiful, you're meeting the part of him that believed art could make the world better." That evening, after Zara had gone to bed, Maya sat alone with her father's portrait of her teenage self. She studied the determination he had captured in her young face, and realized that she would need that same strength now for different challenges. Her phone rang again. It had been ringing all day, but this time the caller ID showed Jerome's number. "Maya, you okay? There's reporters asking questions about you and your family." "I'm okay, Jerome. It's just a lot to process." "Listen," Jerome said, his voice serious. "Your daddy." 3 months later, Maya stood in the main gallery of the Atlanta Museum of Art, watching visitors discover her father's work for the first time. The exhibition, titled Marcus Johnson, Beauty in the Margins, had opened 2 weeks earlier to overwhelming public response and critical acclaim. Maya had insisted that the retrospective debut in Atlanta, in the city where her father had lived and dreamed and created his extraordinary art. The transformation of her life had been swift and sometimes overwhelming, but Maya had navigated each decision with the careful consideration that her father had taught her through his example. With Sarah Mitchell's guidance, she had retained ownership of all his artwork while lending pieces for the exhibition. The authentication process had confirmed what Dr. Whitman suspected. Marcus Johnson was indeed the anonymous artist whose work had intrigued collectors for 2 decades. But, more importantly, the research had uncovered the full scope of her father's secret artistic career. He had successfully placed 12 pieces in exhibitions across the Southeast between 1999 and 2003, each time using different pseudonyms and false contact information. When gallery owners or collectors tried to reach the artist for more work, they found disconnected phone numbers and fake addresses. Marcus Johnson had been protecting not just his art from prejudice, but his family from disappointment if his dreams didn't materialize. Maya watched as a young black girl, probably around Zara's age, stood transfixed before the drawing that had started everything, the sketch of a girl reading on a porch swing. The piece had been carefully removed from the diner and was now displayed with museum lighting and detailed provenance information. But somehow it looked exactly the same to Maya, a father's love rendered in careful lines and patient shading. "It still amazes me," said Robert Hartwell, joining Maya near the entrance to the gallery. "Every time I see people discovering his work for the first time, I remember why I fell in love with that first piece 25 years ago." Maya smiled at him, grateful for the friendship that had developed from his initial honesty about her father's work. Robert had become an unofficial advisor and advocate, helping Maya understand the art world without ever pressuring her to make decisions that served his interests. "The response has been incredible," Maya agreed. "Did you see the review in Art in America? A master craftsman whose technical excellence was matched only by his profound humanity," Robert quoted from memory. "Johnson's work reminds us that great art emerges from authentic experience, not academic pedigree." "Your father would have loved that." Maya nodded, then gestured toward a corner of the gallery where Zara sat on a small bench, sketching in a notebook. Over the past 3 months, Zara had become fascinated with drawing, spending hours copying techniques from her grandfather's sketchbooks. Maya had enrolled her in art classes at the community center, watching as her daughter's natural talent began to emerge. "She's getting good," Robert observed. "She is. But more than that, she understands why it matters. She knows that Grandpa Marcus didn't draw just because he was talented, but because he believed art could help people see beauty in their own lives." Dr. Whitman approached them, having just finished leading a tour for a group of art students. "Maya, I wanted to let you know that the Smithsonian has formally requested to include 3 of your father's pieces in their upcoming exhibition on underrecognized American artists. It would be a tremendous honor." Maya had learned to carefully consider each opportunity rather than accepting everything immediately. What would be involved? The pieces would tour nationally for 18 months, then be returned to you. The exposure would be invaluable for establishing your father's place in American art history. Maya looked around the Atlanta gallery, noting how many visitors were studying the wall text that explained her father's life and artistic journey. The museum had done an excellent job of presenting his work in context, explaining both his technical achievements and the social barriers that had forced him to work anonymously. "I think he would like that," Maya said. "He always believed his art was meant to be shared." As the afternoon progressed, Maya found herself in conversation with visitors who had been moved by her father's story. A retired factory worker from Birmingham told her that seeing Marcus Johnson's work had inspired him to start drawing again after 40 years. A young art student from Spelman College explained how the exhibition had changed her understanding of what it meant to be a Black artist in America. But the conversation that meant the most to Maya came from an unexpected source. Victoria Sterling, the gallery director who had tried to buy her father's work for a fraction of its value, approached her near the end of the day. "Ms. Johnson," Victoria said, her manner subdued and respectful, "I owe you an apology." Maya was surprised by the directness of the statement. "For what?" "For trying to take advantage of your situation 3 months ago. I was so focused on acquiring what I thought would be a valuable piece that I forgot about treating you fairly or honoring your father's legacy appropriately." Maya studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of insincerity but finding only genuine regret. "What changed your mind?" "Seeing this exhibition, understanding who your father really was, and what he accomplished." Victoria gestured toward the gallery walls where Marcus Johnson's life's work was displayed with the dignity and respect it deserved. "I realized that my approach would have meant his work disappeared into a private collection where no one would have learned his story." "Thank you for saying that," Maya said. "It means a lot." "More than that," Victoria continued, "I want you to know that Sterling Galleries would be honored to represent your father's estate for any future sales or exhibitions. No pressure, no urgency, just a commitment to presenting his work with the respect it deserves." Maya appreciated the offer, though she and Sarah Mitchell had already developed a careful strategy for managing her father's artistic legacy. They had established the Marcus Johnson Foundation, which would use proceeds from sales to provide scholarships for young artists from underserved communities. The foundation would also work to identify and support other overlooked artists whose work deserved broader recognition. As evening approached, Maya gathered Zara and prepared to leave the museum. But before they reached the exit, she was stopped by a familiar voice. "Maya." She turned to see Jerome walking toward them, wearing a suit instead of his usual kitchen attire. He looked slightly uncomfortable, but proud as he gestured toward the exhibition. I had to see it for myself, he said. Your daddy's work in a real museum, with all these people appreciating what he did. Maya hugged him warmly. I'm so glad you came. Dad would have wanted you here. Jerome studied the nearest piece, a charcoal drawing of an elderly man reading a newspaper on a park bench. You know, he used to talk about wanting to draw regular people, working people. Said he wanted to show that everybody had dignity, everybody had a story worth telling. He succeeded, Maya said softly. That he did. That he did. Jerome paused, then continued. The diner's different now, you know, since all this happened. People come by wanting to see where the drawing hung, wanting to hear the story. It's brought attention to the neighborhood, brought business to local shops. Maya was pleased to hear that the discovery of her father's work was having positive effects beyond her own family. That's wonderful. And Maya? That drawing's back on the wall now. Museum quality frame, professional lighting, insurance coverage. But it's still there, still watching over the diner like it has for 12 years. Maya had donated the original drawing to the museum for the exhibition, but she had arranged for a high-quality reproduction to be displayed permanently at Riverside Diner. It felt important to maintain that connection to the place where her father's recognition had begun. On the drive home, Zara chattered excitedly about everything she had seen and heard at the museum. Mama, do you think Grandpa Marcus knows that people love his art now? Maya considered the question seriously. I think he always knew that his art was worth loving. What makes me happy is that now other people get to discover that too. Will I be an artist like him? You can be anything you want to be, baby. But if you choose to be an artist, you'll do it because you love creating beautiful things, just like he did. The recognition and money and museums, those are nice, but they're not the most important part. That night, after Zara was asleep, Maya sat in her new apartment, larger than their old place, but still in the same neighborhood where she had grown up, looking through her father's sketchbooks one more time. The financial security that had come with the authentication of his work had given her choices she never thought she would have. She had quit her job at the diner to focus full-time on managing his artistic legacy, but she visited regularly to have coffee and catch up with Jerome. More importantly, the recognition of her father's talent had given Maya a sense of completion that she hadn't realized she was missing. For 12 years, she had carried the knowledge that her father was extraordinary, but that knowledge had felt like a secret that only she understood. Now the world could see what she had always known. Marcus Johnson had been an artist of remarkable talent and humanity whose work deserved to be celebrated. The phone rang, interrupting her reflection. It was Sarah Mitchell calling with an update about the Foundation's first scholarship recipients. Maya, I have wonderful news. We've selected our first 5 scholarship recipients for the Marcus Johnson Foundation. They're all young artists from backgrounds similar to your father's. Tremendous talent, limited resources, big dreams. Maya felt tears of pride and gratitude fill her eyes. Tell me about them. As Sarah described each scholarship recipient, a young woman from rural Alabama who drew portraits of her farming community, a teenager from Detroit whose paintings captured the beauty of urban decay and renewal, a recent high school graduate from El Paso who created powerful work about the immigrant experience. Maya realized that her father's legacy was already growing beyond anything he could have imagined. They'll all be able to attend art school now, Sarah continued. And each scholarship comes with mentorship support and exhibition opportunities. Your father's work is directly creating opportunities for the next generation of artists. After hanging up, Maya walked over to the window and looked out at the Atlanta skyline that her father had painted in one of his most beautiful oils. The city sparkled with lights, each one representing a life, a dream, a story worth telling. Marcus Johnson had spent his life believing that art could make the world more beautiful, that every person deserved to be seen with dignity and respect, that talent and determination could overcome almost any obstacle. His daughter had learned those lessons well, and now she was using his artistic legacy to create opportunities for others who faced the same barriers he had confronted. Maya thought about the young girl who would receive her scholarship letter tomorrow, the one who reminded Sarah of Marcus Johnson with her careful attention to detail and her desire to draw the beauty she saw in everyday moments. That girl would never have to submit her work anonymously. She would never have to hide her identity to get fair consideration of her talent. That was Marcus Johnson's true masterpiece. Not any single drawing or painting, but the change he had created in the world, the doors he had opened for those who would come after him. His art had always been about more than technique or beauty. It had been about dignity, hope, and the belief that every person's story mattered. As Maya prepared for bed in her new apartment, surrounded by her father's artwork and her daughter's early drawings, she felt the deep satisfaction that comes from honoring a promise. She had made sure that Marcus Johnson's story was told truthfully and completely. She had protected his legacy while using it to create opportunities for others. Most importantly, she had taught her daughter that talent and character and determination were the true measures of a person's worth. The poor black waitress who had said, "Sir, that's my father's drawing," to a billionaire in a small Atlanta diner had become the guardian of an artistic legacy that would inspire and support artists for generations to come. And somewhere, in the realm where dreams and memory intersect, Marcus Johnson was smiling with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose faith in beauty had been vindicated at last. Would be proud as hell of how you're handling this. But he'd also want to make sure you're being smart about it. Don't let anybody push you around, you hear? I hear you, Jerome. Thank you. And Maya? That drawing's been watching over the diner for 12 years. Whatever you decide to do with it, just remember that it's brought a lot of people comfort over the years. It's been part of our family here, too. After hanging up, Maya walked over to her window and looked out at the street where she had grown up, the neighborhood where her father had dreamed of something bigger while working night shifts and raising a daughter alone. Tomorrow would bring new decisions and new pressures, but tonight she felt connected to his courage in a way that made anything seem possible. Marcus Johnson had never stopped believing that his art mattered, even when the world seemed uninterested in recognizing his talent. Now Maya would have to find the same faith in herself, the same determination to honor beauty and truth despite overwhelming circumstances. The scared waitress who had served meatloaf yesterday was gone. In her place was a woman preparing to tell her father's story to the world, to make sure that his vision of beauty and dignity would finally receive the recognition it deserved. More closely, the technique was sophisticated, showing an understanding of color and composition that must have taken years to develop. But beyond the technical skill, there was something personal about the way he had captured the city. This wasn't just a pretty picture. It was a love letter to the place where he had struggled and dreamed and ultimately created something beautiful. As she prepared for bed, carefully rewrapping each piece and returning it to the box, Maya felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. Pride because her father had been even more remarkable than she had known. Sadness because he had carried his dreams alone, never sharing his hopes and fears about his artistic ambitions with the daughter who would have supported him completely. But maybe that was part of what made him extraordinary. Maybe the determination to pursue beauty and meaning despite overwhelming obstacles, to create art even when no one was watching, was exactly the kind of courage that produced great artists. Maya lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Would Dr. Whitman confirm that her father was the anonymous artist? Would his work really be worth millions? And if it was, how would she handle the responsibility of preserving and protecting his legacy? Most importantly, how would she make sure that her father's story was told truthfully, that people understood not just the value of his artwork, but the character of the man who had created it? How could she help the world see Marcus Johnson not as a poor janitor who happened to be talented, but as a dedicated artist who had never stopped believing in the power of beauty to transform lives? As sleep finally began to claim her, Maya made a silent promise to her father's memory. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever opportunities or challenges lay ahead, she would make sure that his story was told with the same honesty and dignity that he had brought to everything he had ever created. The next morning would begin a journey that neither Maya nor her father could have imagined. But tonight, surrounded by his artwork and his love, she felt ready to honor both his dreams and her own. "Oh, you for being honest with me. Yesterday and today. Your father would be proud," Robert said, looking once more at the drawing on the wall. Not just of his artwork, but of the daughter he raised. The way you stood up to those gallery people, the way you're thinking about his legacy instead of just the money, that takes character. As the extraordinary morning finally settled into something resembling normal, Maya returned to her routine of setting up tables and preparing for the lunch rush. But everything felt different now. The drawing on the wall wasn't just a memory anymore. It was potentially the key to understanding a hidden chapter of her father's life. Jerome emerged from the kitchen with a cup of coffee for her, something he had never done in all the years they had worked together. "You doing okay?" he asked. Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. "I don't know yet. This feels too big to be real." "Your daddy always said his art would outlive him," Jerome said. Maybe he was right about that too. As Maya prepared for another day of serving meatloaf and coffee, she couldn't help but wonder what else she was about to discover about the man who had taught her to see beauty in small things, even as he quietly pursued recognition for his own extraordinary vision of the world. "Really nice." He loved Dad's drawing. "That's good," Jerome said. "Your daddy would have been proud to know people still appreciate his work." Maya nodded, tucking the extra money into her pocket. It would help with groceries this week, maybe even allow her to buy Zara those art supplies she had been asking for. As she finished her cleaning and prepared to leave for the day, she found herself looking at the drawing with new eyes, seeing it the way the stranger had seen it, not just as a memory of her father, but as a work of art worthy of admiration. She had no way of knowing that the man who had just left the diner was already making phone calls from his car, calls that would change everything she thought she knew about her father's legacy. She had no way of knowing that tomorrow would bring revelations that would shake the foundation of everything she believed about her life. For now, there was only the quiet satisfaction of a good conversation with a kind stranger, the promise of picking up her daughter from school, and the familiar comfort of her father's drawing watching over the diner where she had learned to make a living and find dignity in honest work.